Have you ever felt the invisible power of someone who says nothing, yet alters everything? They do not raise their voice. They do not explain. They do not beg. They simply withdraw, and suddenly the atmosphere trembles. People grow unsettled. The chase. They wonder. The moment they are no longer centered in that person's emotional field, the illusion of control begins to dissolve. Now ask yourself, what if you did the same? What if, instead of reacting to every trigger, you chose stillness over noise, presence over performance, and conscious retreat over habitual eruption? That is where your transformation begins. Because the truth is, the world has conditioned you to remain predictable, emotionally exposed, perpetually reachable, endlessly reactive. They control you not by force, but by your reflexes, your need to respond, to please, to be seen. But the moment you pull back, not in bitterness but in awareness, the entire game shifts. Those who thought they knew you begin to realize they only knew the version of you that danced to their rhythm. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." To observe closely, who becomes anxious when your energy turns inward? Who stirs the pot just to extract a reaction? Their agitation is not about you. It is a mirror of their dependency on your emotional availability. And what does it reveal? That even now, you may be leaking your life force, trying to soothe, appease, or maintain connections that were never anchored in truth. With every automatic yes, every reactive outburst, every swallowed need, you bleed a little more of your vitality, until all that remains is fatigue, frustration, and an emptiness that whispers, "This is not who I am." That is why you feel hollow, because you've given your essence to those who never earned your silence. But this video is not about abandoning the world. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about choosing what Jung called individuation, the sacred path of becoming whole, sovereign, and real. And this path begins the moment you understand that silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. Withdrawal, when chosen from clarity rather than fear, is not rejection, it is power. So now I ask you, gently but directly, how much longer will you let the emotions of others dictate the temperature of your soul? How long will you flinch when someone presses your oldest wound? Perhaps it's time to step back, to stop explaining, to let mystery return to your presence. Because the moment you stop being available, everything begins to change. Since you were young, the world trained you to be constantly present, to smile when you wanted to cry, to say yes when your soul whispered no. You were conditioned to believe that your value lived in your availability, that love was earned by your willingness to be emotionally open, endlessly responsive, always on call. But let me offer you a truth few dare to say aloud. This constant availability is not compassion, it is captivity. And as long as you cling to the belief that your worth depends on being reachable at all times, you will be drained, discarded, and quietly replaced the moment your usefulness fades. Why? Because emotional predictability breeds utility. When people know they can access you at will, you become a button, a quick fix, a temporary balm, a means to an end. They press you when they feel lonely, when they need praise, when they seek escape from themselves. And then, without a second thought, they put you back on the shelf. You don't notice it at first, because you live inside the illusion that being present for everyone will one day mean someone will finally be present for you. But it doesn't work like that. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, to be seen, to feel worthy. And it is this very mask that whispers, be available or be forgotten. So, you swallow your needs. You say you're fine when you're suffocating. You respond instantly, even when you're depleted. You over-explain, defend, and justify yourself, believing you owe the world a reason for every breath you take. But here is the cost. The more you stand center stage in someone else's play, the more you vanish from your own. Constant availability is a quiet form of self-erasure, a way to avoid rejection, to manage others' perceptions, to barter for love. But this control comes at a devastating price. Your inner peace, your sacred energy, the life force you distribute as if it were endless. Yet it is not. It is finite. And those who demand constant access to you do not truly seek you. They seek the validation, entertainment, distraction, or comfort you provide. The moment you shift, the moment you assert a boundary or pause before responding, they recoil. They label you difficult, distant, changed, not because you became someone else, but because you ceased to serve their need. And here lies the brutal paradox. The more accessible you are, the less others value your presence. That which is always within reach becomes invisible. That which costs nothing earns no respect. So, pause. Reflect. Who truly deserves your time? Who has earned the sacred currency of your presence, your listening, your energy, or perhaps more importantly, your absence? But before we can answer who truly deserves your presence, we must first turn inward and ask a far more essential question. Why do we react so much? Why do we feel the need to constantly explain ourselves, to respond instantly, to seek approval from those who often do not understand us? What drives this nearly automatic impulse to please, to justify, to be emotionally available at all costs? The answer lies in something Carl Jung called psychic energy, and understanding this concept may just change everything. Because your energy is not just your fuel, it is your essence, your currency, your soul's breath. And if you do not learn how to protect it, someone else will surely learn how to use it against you. Jung never saw the psyche as a mechanical machine reacting blindly to external events. He saw it as an energy system, a sacred and finite wellspring, where every thought, every emotion, every reaction costs something. The question is, are you spending that energy consciously, or is the world spending it for you? Every time you respond impulsively to a trigger, you lose a piece of your power. When you argue to defend your worth against a baseless criticism, when you engage in petty disputes just to prove a point, when you chase validation from those who never valued you to begin with, you are leaking psychic energy into black holes that offer nothing in return. Jung once said, "That which you resist persists." The more you react, the more entangled you become. The more you fight for approval, the more invisible your true self becomes. People who are emotionally depleted are not weak. They are simply misaligned. And when you live in that state of depletion, you become open, exposed, easy to read, easy to use. Those who thrive on control, manipulators, energy vampires, emotionally avoidant individuals can sense this. They watch how you rush to respond, how you cannot sit in discomfort, how you try to fix what was never yours to carry. And they take advantage. Jung taught that a healthy mind is one that knows how to contain its energy. It means knowing how to say no without guilt, how to remain still without shame, how to watch without rushing to act. Because true power is not in the reaction, it is in the choice to act with intention. And you can only do this when you know yourself deeply enough to recognize your own impulses before they become your downfall. How many nights have you lost to obsessive overthinking? How often have you replayed conversations in your mind, tortured by what you should have said or paralyzed by someone's coldness? This is psychic energy hemorrhaging, your life force feeding ghosts, fueling old wounds, sustaining dynamics that would die if you simply stopped responding. Psychic energy, when preserved, becomes presence. You walk into a room and people feel you without a word. But when it's scattered, you become invisible, overly reactive, and emotionally fragile. And let me tell you, this world has little mercy for those who cannot guard their own spirit. So start watching. What makes you flinch? What pulls you off center without permission? These are your soul's open doors. And this is the work, not to become cold or numb, but to become sovereign. Because when you learn to conserve your energy, something miraculous happens. You break the unconscious projections others have placed on you. You shatter the roles they've assigned. And that, more than anything, disrupts the quiet manipulations they once used to keep you bound. In the next part of this journey, we will enter the hidden world of energetic manipulation, where opportunistic individuals feed on your presence like unseen parasites. And what disarms them completely? Your unavailability. Prepare yourself to look, perhaps for the first time, into the eyes of those who have quietly drained you for years without your awareness. You may think you're in control. You may believe your reactions are conscious choices. But the truth lies deeper and darker. Most of your emotional responses are not decisions. They are programs, emotional reflexes shaped by wounds, fears, and unmet needs. And those who know how to read your emotional code can manipulate you effortlessly. They don't need to raise their voices or threaten you outright. They simply press the right emotional button, the one you've left exposed, and you react, again and again. Carl Jung called this mechanism projection, a psychological defense where individuals disown parts of themselves by unconsciously placing them onto others. But here's what most people miss. Projection is a two-way mirror. While others project onto you, you unconsciously absorb those images, especially when you are too emotionally available. You become a screen, a blank canvas, a mirror for the unresolved shadows of others. Think about it. The friend who only appears in crisis, the partner who clings when they need saving, the person who flatters you only when you serve their needs. These are not coincidences. They are relational roles you've unconsciously agreed to play. And why do you agree? Because beneath it all, there is fear. Fear of not being loved, fear of rejection, fear of being left behind. The most powerful manipulation does not arrive with confrontation. It arrives in silence, through the quiet burden of guilt. It whispers, you owe them, you should be there, you have to help, even when the cost is your own emotional collapse. This is the heart of it. The manipulator doesn't need to control you directly. They only need you to keep reacting predictably. As long as you play your part, the illusion remains intact. But the moment you step out of the role, when you start saying no, when you respond with silence instead of justification, when you withdraw instead of explaining, the projection collapses. The mask they placed upon you falls away. And now they are left face to face with themselves. Most are not ready for this. Your unavailability becomes a threat because it forces them to confront their own emptiness. Your silence stirs the chaos they've buried within. And what follows is often backlash, criticism, emotional outbursts, attempts to guilt you back into your role. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stopped being the mirror that comforts their denial. Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you pull away, when you no longer feed the cycle, the shadow of the other begins to surface. And for many, that is unbearable. But what about you? Are you willing to face the discomfort that comes with being misunderstood, rejected, even vilified for choosing yourself? Are you ready to sit in the sacred silence that follows rupture? Because it is within that silence that a new power is born. Not the power to control others, but the power to reclaim yourself. And now we enter the heart of it. In this next part, we will uncover why silence, true, conscious silence, can become one of the most devastating weapons of the human psyche, not because it wounds, but because it awakens. In a world that is unbearably loud, where everyone is shouting to be seen, to be right, to respond faster than they can even feel, there exists a sacred power known only to the few, the power of intentional silence. Not the silence of avoidance, not the silence of suppression, but a silence born from lucid presence. A silence that is not absence, but heightened awareness. Carl Jung understood that silence is not an empty space. It is the fertile ground where transformation takes root. Because when you stop reacting, you begin observing. And when you begin observing, you start to see patterns, games, manipulations, the subtle choreography of self-sabotage and emotional repetition that once played beneath your awareness. This kind of silence breeds clarity. And clarity, for those who seek to control you, is dangerous. Have you ever noticed how some people become deeply unsettled when you do not respond, when you do not explain yourself, when you simply disappear? It's not because they miss you. It's because your silence steals their narrative. As long as you are speaking, justifying, reacting, you are still playing by their rules. But when you go quiet, you change the entire game. And those who thrive on your compliance begin to unravel. Because true silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of inner mastery. It is the refusal to be emotionally hijacked. It is the strength to walk away from battles that only deplete your spirit. Jung believed that individuation, the sacred journey of becoming your most authentic self, requires silence. Because only in silence can you finally hear your own voice without the constant noise of the world drowning it out. But be warned, this kind of silence comes at a cost. It will estrange you from those who only valued your performance, not your presence. It will confuse those who saw you only through the lens of their own projections. It will provoke those who depended on your availability to stabilize their own chaos. And they will call you names: cold, distant, arrogant, not because you became any of those things, but because you stepped out of the role they cast you in. The truth is, the more you mature, the more reverent you become with your words. You begin to understand that every sentence is an energetic transaction, and not everyone has earned the right to hear your truth. Sometimes silence is not retreat, it is sovereignty. It is the language of the soul that no longer needs to convince or perform. Silence is uncomfortable because it forces others to sit with their own noise. And that discomfort reveals far more about them than any explanation ever could. You do not need to defend your absence, it speaks for itself. And those who are threatened by it simply reveal how much they relied on your chaos to avoid their own. Yet the most powerful silence is not the one that disrupts others. It is the silence that rebuilds you from within, the silence that reconnects you with something eternal, something deeper than the hunger for approval. It is in this quiet space, beyond the world's demands, that you begin to retrieve your scattered energy and remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And that brings us to a deeper truth, one we will now explore fully. Because it is not enough to merely silence the noise around you. To truly transform, you must relearn how to direct your energy with intention. You must choose where it flows, where it remains, and most importantly, where it must never be squandered again. It is time to become fiercely selective with your soul. If you are in the midst of reclaiming your energy and learning to draw boundaries, you may find profound guidance in my book, Beyond the Shadow, a work that distills Jung's most vital teachings and offers practical tools to protect your energy, fortify your inner world, and reconnect with your truest self. The link is in the pinned comment. But let this be clear, no amount of insight matters if you continue betraying yourself in practice. It is meaningless to understand this mentally if you still say yes when your entire body aches to say no, if you keep replying to messages that disturb your peace, if you engage in hollow conversations or sustain relationships that persist only out of inertia. Awareness without action is just another disguise for self-abandonment. The true beginning of change happens when you make a committed decision to become selective, and that decision demands emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability is not coldness. It is not arrogance. It is not cruelty. It is a reclamation of power. It is choosing not to be emotionally accessible to everyone at any time for any reason. It is standing in the sacred center of your own being and saying, "My energy is mine to govern." And it starts with small acts, choosing not to respond instantly, taking a breath before reacting, stepping out of conflict before it becomes chaos, turning off your phone without guilt, saying, "Not today," saying, "This is not for me," saying, I will not engage. And here is the most revolutionary part. You do not owe anyone an explanation. You do not need to justify your silence, your absence, or your shift. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself. And to many, that is unforgivable. Because when you stop explaining, you dismantle the emotional power structures they once used to keep you accessible, to keep you useful, understanding. Carl Jung understood that individuation, the path to wholeness, always passes through a form of isolation. But this is not the isolation of despair. It is the sacred withdrawal, the psychic retreat in which you rebuild your identity, not from the outside gaze, but from the quiet voice of your own center. Want a true measure of your growth? Watch carefully who begins to pull away when you grow more silent. Who tries to provoke you when you no longer react? Who accuses you of being different when you finally begin to protect yourself? These are not signs of failure. They are confirmations that you are waking up. At first, becoming unavailable will feel unnatural. Guilt will surface. You'll wonder if you're being selfish. Others will say you're distant, too hard, unrecognizable. But this discomfort is part of the sacred undoing. You have spent a lifetime being trained to place yourself second. It is only natural that reclaiming your space will agitate not just you, but also those who benefited from the older, more compliant version of you. Conscious unavailability is the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world, you are saying yes to your soul. When you leave a toxic space, you are declaring that your inner peace is worth more than artificial connection. And when you stop explaining yourself, people may begin to respect you. Not all, but the ones who matter. Not everyone will be ready for this kind of presence. Because your emotional absence will shine a light on their wounds, wounds they were never ready to face. It will reveal just how much they relied on your emotional chaos to maintain their own illusion of control. And it is in this sacred rupture that the real pain emerges, the loneliness, the disorientation, the ache of release. But know this, what feels like loss is actually liberation. But what comes after all of this? What awaits you beyond the withdrawal, beyond the rupture? What is born from the sacred silence that follows your decision to step back from the noise? In this final part, we turn toward what few dare to speak of, the rebirth that can only emerge when you have the courage to be misunderstood, the strength to be alone, and the devotion to become whole on your own terms. Because when you stop being emotionally available to everyone, something ancient and profound begins to stir within you. First comes the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the piercing, hollow silence that echoes through your very core. It makes you question yourself. You wonder if you were too harsh, if you're losing people who once seemed to care, if you've made a mistake. But stay with it. Because this silence is not a punishment, it is a purification. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it begins to cleanse you. It soothes the nervous system, unclutters the psyche, and brings stillness to the emotional storms that once dictated your every move. And from that silence, a deeper presence begins to emerge. Not the absence of connection, but the presence of self. This is solitude, not as emptiness, but as fullness. The sacred solitude of those who have stopped betraying themselves to be loved. In this space, confusion gives way to clarity. Anxiety softens into peace. Desperation dissolves into inner strength. It is here that something extraordinary occurs, the quiet birth of a whole human being. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the becoming of one's true self, demands a temporary separation from the collective. It requires that we disidentify from the persona, from the roles, from the masks. It asks us to walk alone for a time, not in despair, but in reclamation. That is precisely what you are doing when you become consciously unavailable. You are not fleeing the world, you are returning to yourself. And at that threshold, you stop being a mere reactor to life and begin to shape it. You no longer allow circumstances to sculpt you. You become the sculptor. Those who grow uncomfortable with your distance reveal a painful truth. They never truly wanted you. only the function you served. And now with the mask gone, they don't know how to hold you. And that, ironically, sets you free. Yes, you will lose people. But in that loss, you will rediscover yourself. You will walk away from places and patterns that once defined you. But you will return to your essence. You will be misunderstood, but for the first time, you will be respected. Because when you are no longer available for everything, you become rare. You become valuable. You become unforgettable. And do not be deceived, this is nothing less than a rebirth. It is the dawning of a new life, one in which you no longer accept emotional breadcrumbs, psychological games, or hollow affections dressed as love. You begin to accept only what resonates with your peace, your truth, your wholeness. And if you've made it this far, it means a part of you already knows. A part of you has already remembered what it means to belong to yourself. A part of you has already understood this most sacred truth, that to be loved means nothing if it demands the betrayal of your own soul. And that true self-love begins not when the world chooses you, but when you choose yourself, even if it means walking alone for a while. Now, I ask you, genuinely and from the soul, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, even disliked in the name of something greater than approval? Are you truly willing to pay the price of becoming yourself? The path to inner freedom is not paved with comfort. It is forged through courage. If this message stirred something within you, if it echoed truths you've long felt but never spoken, I invite you to write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many among us are ready to step into this sacred transition, to walk the road of self-responsibility, self-respect, and quiet strength. And remember, your journey does not end here. Keep watching the next video. It holds something important, perhaps more than you realize. I'll meet you there.